An assassination in the public square
The stakes are very high.
is putting freedom of speech
Those who celebrate violence should be fired.
to the ultimate test.
They can't be put in jail for that.
This week on Open Record, cheering for murder
There is no constitutional protection.
and the relentless blowback of the social media mob.
It definitely does feel like a witch hunt right now.
From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I am joined by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Fox 6 political reporter Jason Calvi. Jason, thanks for being here.
Bryan, thanks.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, September 16th. It's been 6 days. It's hard to believe it's only been six. It feels like a century, but it's been 6 days since conservative political activist and commentator Charlie Kirk was shot to death during a campus speaking event at Utah Valley State University. On Tuesday, prosecutors charged 22-year-old Tyler Robinson with firing the single fatal shot from a rooftop using a .30-06 bolt-action rifle. They are seeking the death penalty. In the days since the assassination, social media has exploded. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Some of that politically charged commentary has led to a wave of firings across the country. We have a pair of special guests today who are going to talk about that, including Rick Essenberg, an attorney for Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. He'll talk about the legal implications and the limits of free speech on social media and why he believes some of his fellow conservatives may be going too far. We'll also hear from Jason Tadlock, who is superintendent of Elkhorn School District in Walworth County, Wisconsin, where a mistakenly attributed social media post led to a firestorm of angry calls from around the world. Wait until you hear the voicemails they received. That's coming up later on. All of that and more starts when we come right back.
We are back on Open Record. In the days since Charlie Kirk's assassination, we've heard a lot of stories about people getting in trouble, in some cases even losing their jobs for things that they put out on social media. So, Bryan, I know you've been looking into that. What did you find?
I'm looking for just the list I was keeping, and I think I don't think I have even a piece of this, but these are just some of the more, I guess, notable ones we've heard about. There's a Washington Post opinion writer, Karen Atia, who was fired for things she wrote on social media. MSNBC's Matthew Dowd was fired. Middle Tennessee State University assistant dean was fired. An Austin P. theater professor was fired. A climate advisor at NASDAQ. Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance fired an employee. The Carolina Panthers, the Apple Store in Arizona, Office Depot in Michigan, the Joe Burrow Foundation. Dozens of school districts have fired teachers around the country. And in addition to all of that, Marco Rubio said visa revocations are underway for non-citizens who've been seen online celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. American Airlines, United, and Delta, all disciplined employees. And here in Wisconsin, we even had a couple of cases that we'll be talking about. But this is going on all over the place. I don't know if anyone predicted it, saw it coming, but obviously it's been a very politically charged situation. And the response to things people are saying online has been swift and in some cases very final.
Jason, what are you seeing, from the political side? Obviously, this was at a political event and people are saying this is politically charged. Are you seeing things from Wisconsin lawmakers?
Yeah, I think from Wisconsin Democrats and Republican leadership, we heard instant, pretty much condemnation of this shooting, this death, this murder from both the governor, candidates that are running for governor on both Republican and Democratic side, state leaders on the Republican Party as well, all blasting and condemning this death. You had mentioned the people celebrating. One of the people that was fired was a worker at Nextdoor. We know that Nextdoor is a child care facility.
I first thought it was the neighborhood organization.
So did
I was like, somebody from Nextdoor?
Yeah.
Okay, but this
so not the social media
Okay.
app that you use to communicate with your neighbors, but a child care facility. The original post, I'm quoting here from the online post. Yes, I am making his death political. No, I do not care if all you do is spew hate. You're bound to get some. So this was what this person allegedly posted on social media. Nextdoor, then the next day after the death, pretty much put out a statement saying that individual is no longer employed by Nextdoor. I want to again express my sincerest sympathies to Charlie Kirk's family and all those impacted by yesterday's terrible act of violence. So again, you see these companies condemning when employees have celebrated the death of Kirk and now are firing those employees.
What I think is so interesting is we know that social media has gotten people in trouble from time to time. I mean, people that we know have gotten in trouble from time to time. We're a very public medium. And if we use social media, sometimes somebody says something that gets a little bit of blowback, but they're usually sort of a one-off, a case-by-case basis. I don't know that I've ever seen anything this broad happening all at one time, to the point now where there are coordinated campaigns online by conservative commentators and activists saying we're going to do everything we can to out who these people are, find out where they work, pressure their employers to fire them, public or private. We're going to make a point of this. And I've never seen anything like this before. Have you?
No, and I think it's like, I mean, to your point, and listing off these people, now some of them, yes, do work for large corporations, and, you know, there are clearly rules within their corporation, but like many of these people that are posting are just regular people that just have regular jobs that aren't maybe public facing.
You're just a regular person.
You know what
you are, the host of a podcast.
Right, that's fair. But
anyway.
you know what I'm saying? I mean, just like anybody that goes and works a 9-to-5 job is posting about this. I've had friends on my pages that outwardly are, one way or the other, whether they're upset about it or, to your point, Jason, quote, celebrating it, it's a lot of people are doing one or the other.
I know we're going to talk about this with the experts we have coming up, but it's one thing to go online and make a direct threat. For instance, I think someone should assassinate so-and-so. Well, clearly you can't do that. You can't call for violence. But saying that maybe someone who was the victim of violence might have brought it on themselves, is that too far? Where does free speech begin and end? What can you do in terms of something that may reflect on your employer? We're going to talk about all that. But like I said, I don't know that I've ever seen it happen in such a widespread way where I really couldn't get a complete count of how many people have been fired. Just the ones I was able to read about in the news media, but it seems like it could be in the thousands all across the country. Do you get that same sense, Jason?
Yeah, and the tips that came into these online activists that were calling for the firing, they said they got upwards of 30 or more thousand tips. Of course, what we're going to find out a little bit later is at least one of the local tips was completely false, and this associate principal was accused of something she did not say, and we're going to hear those voicemails, and they are shocking.
I want to point out, by the way, too, for anyone watching, we are not exploring on this podcast today whether it is defensible or moral or just to say something like he got what he deserved or whatever. There is absolutely, that is not what's coming here. What we're looking at is, what does the law say about how far you can go and what you risk if you say certain things? Where is the line drawn? And what can go wrong when there's sort of this internet vigilantism? And we're going to hear how that went wrong right here locally. I don't want to really tie things up any longer. I think I actually want to, let's get to our guests right away. We're going to take a break. When we come back, one of the people we're going to talk to is Rick Essenberg, who is president and general counsel for Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, a conservative organization, but one that has done a lot in terms of arguing before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Rick has a lot of knowledge in this area. We're going to talk to him not only about his legal knowledge, but also about what he thinks as a conservative about what's going on right now. We'll do that after this. Welcome back to Open Record. We are joined now via Zoom by Rick Essenberg, President and General Counsel of Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Rick, thanks for being here on Open Record.
Well, thank you for having me.
For our listeners and viewers who aren't familiar with Will, give us a quick background on what is the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty.
Well, we're a legal organization and a think tank, and our mission is to promote the public interest in constitutional government and the rule of law, free markets, and the maintenance of a robust civil society in which we can all seek our own conception of the good.
Before we talk about whether someone should be fired for a distasteful or a hateful social media post, I want to talk about whether they can be fired. What are the limits in terms of what can happen to you if you, and I'm going to say on your personal page, not in a work page, your own personal social media account on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and you say something distasteful, hateful, objectionable. What are the limits there? Are you protected? What does the First Amendment say?
Distinction between a public employer and a private employer. A public employer will be subject to the First Amendment but will also have a little greater leeway with respect to how it treats its own employees. If it's something that this individual said in the course of their job, they have almost plenary power to dismiss you, subject to the normal limitations. If it's something that you said privately, the Supreme Court has developed this, I won't say convoluted, but complicated balancing test, which is essentially aimed at getting to whether or not what you said on your private email impairs your ability to do your job for the government. If you work for a private employer, the First Amendment doesn't apply to them. And so they have the ability to discharge you if they don't like what you said, unless it runs afoul of some other legal limitation, such as some provision in anti-discrimination laws, although they typically do not apply to discrimination based on political viewpoint.
I was thinking to myself, like I was trying to think the point of absurdity. I know you have to do this sometimes when you make arguments in court. You have to bring up almost an absurd example and say, well, what about this? So
we call it the parade of horribles.
Okay, so here we go. My colleague here loves candy corn. She is also my supervisor. I do not like candy corn. If I post on social media or I send emails or whatever I do and I say candy corn sucks, and she says, I don't like that opinion, you're fired. Can she do that? If if this is a private, employer, can she do that?
Yes, she can. You're an at-will employee, and you can be fired for anything which isn't limited by contract or limited by some other provision in the statute. And there is no protection that I'm aware of in the statute for dislikers of candy corn.
So I lied.
Sorry about
I love
that.
it.
Yeah, okay.
It's great. As long as you have it with peanuts or something. No, but so in terms of private employment, at will employment, you're saying there's really almost no limit to what the employer can do. I mean, I know there are. I'm sure employment lawyers would say there are definitely limits. There are things.
There are limits, but the fact that but you don't have free speech is not one of the limitations unless some locality has passed a law suggesting that it should be, and that itself would have a lot of constitutional problems.
So the anti-discrimination factor that you mentioned, so if you were to post something about your faith on your private social media and then your boss fired you for that, then that would be protected under anti-discrimination laws?
Right. Or if somehow what you said could be tied into some form of, racial or gender discrimination, then we're talking about a different situation.
What about, you talked about the distinction between private and public employers. In a lot of cases, we're hearing these are school teachers. They work for a government entity, or maybe it's a city worker or something like that, or a state employee, federal employee. How is it different there?
Let's put aside the situation where, somebody is saying something in the course of performing their duties. Because at that point, you're speaking on behalf of the government, you're speaking on behalf of a school district, and they absolutely can tell you what to say and what not to say, with the exception of universities. Universities are a little bit of a special animal. But let's assume that you're on your private social media account. The question essentially becomes, have you said something which will impair your duty to go ahead and perform your job? And, school teacher is a sensitive position. So I can imagine hypotheticals where a school teacher might say something which calls into question his or her ability to serve all the children of that district. I would have to say that most of the stuff that I've seen on social media, while it may be, and often is, ghoulish, vile, disgusting, inappropriate, it wouldn't fall into that category.
Rick, is there a difference then between if I'm a teacher and I post something about, let's say, this death, and it's that vile, it's that stuff? Is that what's the difference then between that and maybe me going in front of my class and saying, hey, has everybody heard about this? And then giving your opinion? Well,
because at that point, you're acting on behalf of the school district. And, teachers, and I know you're going to talk to a school superintendent later in this podcast who will be able to perhaps articulate this much better than I can. But school districts place all sorts of restrictions and requirements on teachers. You're going to teach math. You're going to use the following textbook. You're going to use, you're going to do the following things. And so at that point, you're really not speaking on your own. You are you are really performing on behalf of the school district a service for these children, and the school district can direct that. Now, it gets more complicated as you get into a university setting where you have this concept of academic freedom and an open question as to the extent to which academic freedom might be incorporated into the First Amendment in some way, or oftentimes there's a contract which guarantees the right of free speech. But typically in a K-12 public school setting, that you don't have that.
I think you're talking, of course, in government setting, and I know that if maybe there's fewer limits in the private sector, it doesn't really matter. But I think of in many private sector cases, you have employers that now have morality clauses in contracts. Essentially, if you go out and you do something that disparages the company or embarrasses the company or something like that, then we can do something. And I think, as an example, we had a local meteorologist who was fired over posts related to Elon Musk. It was a very controversial situation. People with strong opinions on both sides. And some people I know were saying, but this was on a private account. It wasn't the work account. But that private account identified where this person was employed. And I just wonder, does that matter in terms of sort of brand recognition, or are you representing the employer? If it's your private page, but you say I work here, does that give the employer sort of greater leverage in doing something?
Yeah, right. So to review the fundamentals, the First Amendment applies to the government, doesn't apply to private employers or private entities. However, if a private employer enters into a contract with somebody that guarantees their employment in some way, then the question becomes, well, what does the contract require? And, it would depend on the wording of this morals clause. But if the idea here is that an employee is not supposed to do anything that could reflect poorly on their employer, you're going to have a hard time arguing, well, the fact that this was on my private social media account, or this was something that I did outside of work, if it becomes public and it in fact does reflect poorly on the employer, you're going to have a hard time using that or sort of resisting termination and resisting the use of that morals clause in order to accomplish that termination.
So there's these legal parameters, but I also want to talk about what's actually happening. And we are seeing these groups, these conservative groups that are collecting as many of these posts as they can find, looking for personal information, doxing individuals by putting their personal information out there for the internet mob to essentially attack and say, try to get them fired. And we're seeing, prominent conservatives who are supporting this, who are saying there should be more of this. I believe Vice President J.D. Vance essentially signaled his support for this kind of thing. You have spoken a little bit differently. I think you wrote, actually, after seeing a post by a local talk radio host, Dan O'Donnell, I'm talking about there being 50,000 names. He thinks there should be 100,000 in these databases. You said, let's slow the roll. Tell me your thoughts on that and what you think about what's going on here.
Well, first of all, I want to say that there are a lot of conservatives that have spoken out. For example, Attorney General Bondi said there's a difference between free speech and hate speech. I can't begin to tell you the number of conservatives who on social media, after she made that statement, who said, no, that's wrong, right? Free speech is broader than that. So I don't know that everyone is accepting this type of thing, but I think here's the problem that we have. We live in a very polarized world in which people make very promiscuous use of very strong and derogatory terms to describe their political opponents, right? The people are racists, they're fascists, they're homophobes, they're transphobes, they're communists, they're, whatever you want to call them. And a lot of the times that rhetoric is overheated and leads to the type of environment where you do see the vile and disgusting things that happened in the wake of the Kirk assassination. I mean, whether you agree with Charlie Kirk or not, he wasn't any of those things, and he certainly didn't deserve to be murdered. On the other hand, the appropriate response for us as conservatives, who say that our mission is to preserve the Constitution, which would include things like the First Amendment. Our proper response is not going to say, "Okay, well, you did it to us; we're going to do it back to you." Our our I think our charge is to insist upon what our Constitution establishes, which is a system of deliberative democracy in which we debate issues, we enact policy in accordance with the rule of law. We don't always agree on things. In fact, our founders didn't think we would ever agree on everything, but they set up a system in which we could disagree productively. We could disagree and then we could continue, but we could continue to live together. And I think both of those two things that I talked about, this dehumanization of the opposition, this existential language, and this idea that, well, you did it to us, now we're going to do it to you. Both of these things are inconsistent with the system that our framers created for us, and that has worked, pretty well, really, for a big country for almost 250 years.
But at the same time, let's just say that you were a business owner of a coffee shop, for example, and you found that one of your employees, one of your baristas, was on this list and had said something really disgusting, celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. You would say to yourself, potentially as a business owner, well, if that's what they think in private, I can't trust this person. I'm going to have to let them go. I mean, would you, as a business owner, let that person go? Would you fire them?
Well, again, it really depends on what's said. I think it depends on what they said, and it depends, I think, to some degree, on what their position is within the company. And the higher up they are, the more likely they are to reflect poorly on the company. But I wouldn't say that it's impossible that somebody would say something on social media, either frankly on the right or on the left, which would reflect so poorly on the company, and hurt my business so badly that I couldn't continue to employ that person. But we leave those decisions, for the most part, to private employers, and I think that they should have respect for a culture of free speech and give it due weight. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's their call.
It doesn't seem in most of these cases, though, like there is a calm deliberation that's being made, because there are such vicious attacks coming. Whether you agree with the attacks or not, they're very aggressive attacks coming from I called it the social media mob in the introduction. I don't know if I can think of a better term. When you have thousands of people, hundreds of people leaving messages, vile messages, vulgar messages, calling for further violence and things like that. I get the sense that in many cases, the employers here are saying, we didn't bring all of this on ourselves. You brought it on us, and we don't want any part of it. You're gone. Is that kind of what's happening?
Right. Well, so I remember you said earlier on the podcast that you've never seen anything like this before. I have. It was in 2020. It was after the murder of George Floyd. And we were sort of gripped in a moral panic because a horrible thing had happened. And right now, the danger is that we'll once again find ourselves in a moral panic because of a horrible thing that has happened. And that's why my suggestion is, let's slow our roll on this a little bit. You said, I think earlier, that it's been 6 days since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Emotions are still raw. I think everybody needs to take a deep breath and maybe reflect on what they can do to ensure that this doesn't happen. Now, I'm a conservative, and I would tell you that I think the problem has been far more severe on the left with respect to this dehumanization of political opponents. But whether you agree with me or not on that, I think that what we ought to do as a culture and as a country is, step back and sort of appreciate the fact that while we will never all agree, there is a sense in which we are all in this together, and that our Constitution has bequeathed us with a really a marvelous gift. We have a country in which we can have deliberative democracy, in which we can disagree with one another, but yet we can still live together. I think we all ought to prize that, and we ought to be self-reflective about, how we can contribute to the furtherance of that.
I want to get to our next guest, but I want to wrap it up with this especially because of what you just said. First, I think about things like the Bud Light boycott, and then Cracker Barrel more recently, and now all of this doxing with Charlie Kirk. Conservatives have long, as you said, there's been more of this stuff on the left. Conservatives have long said the left was cancel culture and decried cancel culture. Have conservatives now become the party of cancel culture? Has that shifted?
Yeah, I don't think we've become the party of cancel culture, but we're at the risk of doing that. People like me, I'm a Reaganite conservative. I believe in all the old principles, and I'm often told, okay, boomer, that was the old world, and you live in a new one now. And I choose not to live in that world. I believe that we should have respect for freedom of speech. I think we should all understand that we are living in a world where people are going to say things that upset us, and the answer to that is to respond to them. The answer to that is not to try to eliminate the political opposition, either by dehumanizing them, by calling them racists, homophobes, transphobes, communists, socialists, whatever term that you want to apply, fascists. I think what we need to do is renew our commitment to deliberative democracy.
Rick Essenberg, President and General Counsel for the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Thank you for being here on Open Record.
Thank you very much.
We will take a break, and we'll come back right after this. And welcome back to Open Record. Now, before we introduce our next guest, we want to play some audio for you. If you haven't heard about this, I'm going to set it up real quick. We talked about all of these people who've made comments like Charlie Kirk deserved what he got or something to that effect that led to a firestorm of people calling for their termination from their jobs. Well, a teacher in the Elkhorn School District here in Wisconsin, Walworth County, was identified online as having said hateful things about Charlie Kirk's death. And the teacher's first name is Cynthia. Well, it wasn't her. It was a different Cynthia in a neighboring community. The internet got it wrong, but that didn't stop the hateful messages from coming. Here is just a sampling of some of the worst things that people said when they called this teacher and called the Elkhorn School District.
You should be fired immediately, you piece of shit.
You're a disgusting liberal.
You are a sick, vile, and evil, disgusting woman.
You're a lousy piece of shit.
Can't wait till you cry when you get fired.
You are one hateful you communist democratic leftist
we're covering for her.
You have to fire this piece of shit.
She's going to burn in hell, and I hope she dies.
She deserves being shot in the throat.
We're going to have that fired and set on fire and beheaded.
If she wants to drop her address, I'm sure one of us would be able to make that happen.
There is going to be hell to pay.
It's on the internet. People don't forget.
That last one really stands. It's on the internet. People don't forget. It's an ominous statement. Those are just some of the messages that came into the Elkhorn School District. We are joined now by Elkhorn Area School Superintendent Jason Tadlock. Jason, thank you for being here on Open Record.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
You received a lot of those voicemails, both the district and, of course, your teacher, who was mistakenly identified as the offending poster here. What has it been like in your school district for the past several days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk?
You know, we were fortunate that this erroneous identification came out on late Friday afternoon. So a lot of us handling this and responding and the news communication took place over the weekend. But coming back to school on Monday, we had a lot of anxious students and parents. We had over 100 students that were held out of school because parents were worried and concerned for their safety. Our phones did slow down over the weekend in the emails, but Yet Monday, we still continue to receive quite a few calls. I probably had one about every 6 to 10 minutes to start off the day, but then around noon it started to die down. And then yesterday was fairly normal, a much greater reduction in the calls and the emails, and today it's gone down to almost none.
And the total
So
number
today's the first day we feel pretty much back to normal.
and the total number of voicemails and phone calls and emails that you received?
Just on our district main line, we've got to be approaching about 1,000 voicemails, and from an email standpoint, probably 300 to 400.
And I want to be clear, these, because I played this audio for my wife, and she thought these were all people in the area. These are coming from all over the country, right? And I think maybe even some beyond the borders of the United States.
Yeah, and we haven't done a reverse phone number search on many of them yet, but the ones that we did begin looking at, very few from Wisconsin. So I give credit to the Wisconsin people, very few from the area codes in Wisconsin, a lot of Texas phone numbers, a lot of Florida phone numbers. But all over the country. We very well could have had some from international. I'd have to go through those, but we will do a reverse search and look at those. We're compiling those in a database and looking for the repeat offenders who may be subject to harassment charges.
Did anybody call back and apologize? Did anybody acknowledge that they were wrong?
We have had a handful of people reach back out and apologize. They were often the ones that were, who had emailed and often in a more professional tone. But we have received a handful of apologies, nothing near the 1,000 phone calls that we received.
I want to go back through this because when this first happened, this was a conservative commentator, Ryan Fournier, I don't know how he pronounces it, but he was identifying a lot of people, finding these posts online and then saying, meet so-and-so. This is their job. This is what they do. Here's, how you reach them, reach out and tell them what you think. And people were, and they were very clear. Their intent was to get people fired from their jobs. And that's what they were trying to do with Cynthia. They believed fully that she was the one who had written these offending posts. And in fact, from what I've read in these posts initially, before later retracting this and saying admitting they'd made a mistake, they said, you had responded, or the district had responded saying Cynthia, the teacher, had been hacked. That's what they posted anyway. And then they didn't believe you. And a lot of those voicemails we heard from people who said, you're trying to cover for her. You say she was hacked. Come on, give us a break. We know that you're just covering for her. First of all, I do want to ask you, did you initially think she had been hacked? Is that what was said? How did you figure out ultimately that this wasn't your teacher? Because you have to know from the beginning exactly what happened.
Yeah, so I received a phone call at about 3 o'clock on Friday, and the elementary school, their initial impression, because they're all of a sudden out of the blue, their phones just blew up and they started getting bombarded by these hateful, incendiary people, just leaving these messages right off the bat. And also their Facebook page blew up on their comment section. So they're the people at the school, at first, they didn't know what was going on. They're like, oh my gosh, did somebody's page get hacked? And Cindy, when she saw the post, she's like, well, that's not my Facebook page. Maybe I got hacked. And so that may have been, but they didn't speak to Ryan in that regard, to my knowledge. There may have been a couple people who had called in and they had shared that, but we quickly, by 4 o'clock, we knew exactly what had happened. And I had sent a message out to the entire community. I had direct messaged Ryan Fournier and posted on his Facebook page or under those posts as well what had happened, that it wasn't a hack. It was a misidentification of Cindy, and that it was somebody else's Facebook page, that someone took her picture and posted with it. So there may have been an initial sense that like they didn't know what was going on and they thought that was the case. But you're correct. He reposted 2 more times and said, oh, they're claiming that they were hacked. That's BS. And then posted the district phone number and said, give them a call. So that escalated it further.
What ultimately convinced them that they'd made a mistake?
I believe the news coverage helped. We had conservative contacts that also attempted to reach out and contact him over the weekend and say, hey, this is not accurate. You need to take that down. I know Senator Nass's office did a separate independent investigation. Cindy's own husband and his attorney had contacts in D.C. who know Ryan, that they stated that they reached out and tried to contact him as well. But I think it was really the news coverage and several different stations providing that coverage and the documented facts, and also possibly the potential risk of the liability for slander and defamation, eventually, I believe, made him capitulate and take that down. Again, I would say we didn't even receive an apology for that. It basically kind of pushed it off blame to those who sent him the original post. But I believe, I don't know, I'd have to speak with Ryan. I don't know why it took him so long to take it down and why he didn't respond. I asked several times trying to reach out to him, give me a call. I'd like to talk to you about this on Friday, but it was left up for 2 more days.
And it took him 2 days to take it down. Saturday night, I believe.
Late Saturday night.
Yeah.
No, late Sunday night it was taken down.
Okay.
Or yeah, late Sunday night.
Is Cynthia planning, looking at legal options to potentially sue this online activist?
Yes, I believe they're looking at all their options, as will the school district.
The school district's considering a lawsuit right now.
Yeah, my understanding though is that in speaking with legal initially is that our case isn't nearly as strong as an individual private party like Cindy.
So you've, I'm sure, talked to Cindy throughout this whole process. What has that been like? I know our Ashley Sears sat down with her yesterday to kind of talk through what this whole ordeal has been like for her personally. What has, some of those conversations between the two of you been like?
Yeah, Cindy is an incredible person. She has a good sense of humor, but she said, she's laughed some, but had lots of tears too. But they crossed a line in doxing her, not only having the misidentification, but then they posted her address, her private phone number, not Ryan, but people under his post. And so people started contacting her husband. He's a small business owner. They were contacting his business lines, contacting his phone. Even one of her sons received some messages on his cell phone. So, when you get into that level and they're making these veiled threats, it's scary and upsetting. So, but she's very strong. She's passionate about getting the word out because she doesn't want people to continue to make this type of mistake. People need to slow down. They need to think about digital literacy, look at where the source is coming from. And while I feel this type behavior is absolutely wrong, whether the person did it or not, the reality is people just aren't taking the time to get their facts straight before they even post it. And if you're someone who has 1 million followers on your page, I think there's a heightened level of responsibility that you should be taking, knowing how people are going to behave as a result of your actions.
It is one of the interesting developments in the evolution of the way people communicate. You talk about people with these 1 million followers. We as journalists certainly know that if we report something on the air, we better have our facts right, or we are putting ourselves and our company at risk. It doesn't matter if the tipster got it wrong. We have to know that the tipster's information is right. But there's a lot of people who don't have that sort of journalistic training. They might have a lot of followers and they aren't being as careful. We saw that here. You, in between the break, were talking to our last guest, Rick Essenberg, and you were even asking, because I think it's interesting here, you didn't end up in a situation where you have to consider, should we fire an employee because she wasn't responsible? But you have to ask yourself, what if we did have one? What if we had an employee who did this? What would we do? And what are the limits? I wonder, has this incident caused you to sort of look and reevaluate social media policies, communication to staff as to what the limits are, or how to be careful to not end up putting the district in this kind of situation?
Yes, I believe it has. And I think what's really interesting, well, we don't need to change our policies and so forth. I think it's changed the calculus for anybody in public education or that is a public servant, because the case law that's out there is overwhelmingly supportive of school districts taking action when there's a reasonable assuredness that there's going to be a significant disruption or an impediment of that person being able to continue to do their job. And seeing the level of disruption that this has created, I think it potentially grants school districts and those public entities the ability to take a job action, because had Cindy made those comments and posts, and if I had 150 of my parents at Westside, or even 20 or 25 of them saying, hey, we refuse to have this individual serve as associate principal of our students because of their personal beliefs being made public. That puts a district and employer in a very precarious, situation. And in Wisconsin, with open enrollment, and those families could potentially pull their students, and then that revenue is attached to those students. There's also financial damages to that school district, just like a business. So I did share a message with all of our teachers and staff, just as a reminder that it's a very sensitive time. Emotions are high right now. Please be beyond reproach and maintain our neutrality on all issues, and even on the public facing aspect.
Do you talk to teachers and staff about their private social media and what they post on there?
You know what? We probably in the past, I mean, it is part of our handbook, part of our orientation, but we probably haven't given it the time or attention warranted in light of the current circumstances and situations. So I think this is certainly discussions that we probably want to have. What I will say is I'm sure my staff, having seen this situation, has a much greater heightened awareness of it than perhaps people in other districts. But it's certainly something that I think school districts are going to have to pivot to and pay more attention to, and make sure that their staff are well aware of.
Jason Tadlock, Superintendent of the Elkhorn Area School District, thank you for being here on Open Record.
Thank you for having me. Have a great week.
All right. Thanks a lot there. Before we go to off the record, Jason, I know you had been looking into some things. Talk about the impact this has had. He talked about a pivot point. Turning Point USA has seen a huge impact since the assassination of its founder.
You've seen these vigils that have been taking place, including in our area. You've seen the Turning Point USA office that they have in Waukesha has become a memorial site where people are leaving flowers and vigil candles. And we saw vigils taking place in places like Waukesha and Ozaukee counties. And we saw 3 vigils over the past few days for Charlie Kirk in our area. Turning Point USA, which runs these chapters on campuses across the state of Wisconsin and across the whole country on high school and college campuses, including, I know you went and did some research on where they are in Wisconsin. They're at a lot of the well-known universities and some of the high schools, including Arrowhead.
What's interesting is Erica Kirk. I remember what she said in her first speaking engagement after her husband's death. She said, "You can start one right now, anywhere you are. You can." I wondered what kind of impact that would have. I've got to imagine there's a lot.
It's been huge. I mean, Turning Point USA says they received over 37,000. That's again 37,000 inquiries for new campus chapters in the 48 hours after he was killed. That's 37,000 new potential chapters. There seems to be, to use the phrase of the organization, it seems to be a turning point for potentially for young conservatives. We saw how we saw those videos. He was a communicator who would go to campuses and debate. We talked with a Wisconsin Democrat who ran for U.S. Senate, Stephen Alacara, and he would actually join Kirk at some of these political conferences where they would have a structured debate, and he would help moderate that debate with Kirk and somebody on the left, and he was very much praiseworthy of how he would welcome the debate and have that really wanting to have a robust discussion about the most controversial issues in the whole country. But we saw Turning Point kind of really ramping up their outreach to voters. They were on the ground in Wisconsin knocking on doors in the other battleground states. And, when you look at the polls and you look at the exit polls, the young votes have still primarily voting for Vice President Kamala Harris in 2024. She won, the exit polls say she won 54% of the vote under 30. That seems like a lot, right? But it's not. It's not where Democrats needed to be. And a lot of people are crediting Charlie Kirk for the way that he was able to kind of the grassroots efforts on all these different high school and college campuses, even before they're voting, they're at high school level. And so potentially another turning point with 37,000 new inquiries to start Turning Point chapters on campuses across our country.
All right, we've got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual, have a little fun. Sometimes I stumble through that. I can't even get through it. But, Sarah's got the question.
Here we go.
Right?
All right. Someone gives you $20 right now and you have to spend it immediately. What do you buy? $20. Here you go. What are you buying?
Probably some food.
Okay.
Yeah, I think lunch, probably.
Lunch? Okay.
Peanut M&Ms.
Oof.
I don't know.
Okay.
I probably
same.
wouldn't, but that's what I want to buy.
My first thought was like a really good coffee.
Yeah.
And then
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
like a sandwich. Hey, iced? Oh, listen to it.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
But you didn't buy that. You made it, right?
I made
you
it
know
at
what-
home with the espresso maker.
Yeah.
You know what I probably do? I probably just fill up my gas tank with, however much that
Oh,
gets
that's
me.
so sensible
Because,
of you.
I know.
All right. Well, I
I'm
would
a
treat
practical
myself. I
guy.
would treat myself first. So
Okay. That's just $20 that came out of the blue. That you weren't
yeah,
planning
someone just
on.
walks up and it was like, "Here's $20."
I'll buy myself some coffee,
Yeah.
some peanut M&Ms. I'll get you candy corn. How about that? We've got to wrap things up when we come right back after this. That is all the time we have for this week. For Sarah Smith and Jason Calvi, Bryan Polcyn, we've got Tim Primo behind the scenes. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.